Sometimes I try to prepare for a talk like this. Worked on it for several days, didn't know what I was going to say, and then just stayed up late last night and wrote it all out. And then I realized when I got here, I forgot my notes at home. And then I was going to work on it in the morning over breakfast, and I forgot to put ink in my fountain pen. And I thought, I'm in serious trouble. But then I thought, the Merton's Palace of Nowhere came out in 1979. And it's never the same, but it's essential. So I've been giving this talk for 40-some years. So I can just relax and share this. So I want to share this from my heart on what this is. I think when I graduated from high school in 1961 and entered the monastery, this cloistered Trappist monastery, like seeking God in silence, chanting the Psalms and so on, had a very profound effect on me. And I felt so privileged to have Thomas Merton as my guide in his role as novice master. I saw him as a living mystic teacher. And it just so affected me. And he said to the novices once, he said, every aspect of the monastic life is very carefully designed to protect this contemplative way of life in which we learn from God how to seek and to find and to give ourselves to God, who is wholly given to us in each passing moment of our life, on up to the moment of our death and beyond, this way. But then he said, but there are people in the world who are being led into these more unitive states, and they have no one to help them understand what's happening to them. And they have no one to understand how to cooperate with it and how to yield to it and so on. So when I left the monastery, I wrote Merton's Palace of Nowhere, An Ultimate Identity, and this way. And I started leading these silent retreats around the United States and Canada. Every 50, a couple hundred people would come. And what they were drawn to, the retreat was advertised, the retreat would be in silence, the meals were in silence. There'd be 3 sittings, shared silent minute during the day, and I would speak from my heart about Merton and from the mystics, shedding light on their daily life this way. And so they were drawn to that, and I've been at it ever since. I'm doing it right now. So here we are. And in my work as a psychologist, I got a doctorate as a gift with family support if I would just make a contribution to the mystical traditions to the science of mental health. And so this idea of being a contemplative clinician and putting those two together, I'll probably mention more of that tomorrow. So I thought I would share this with you, this idea. First of all, to get a taste for the timeless wisdom of contemplative Christianity, in concert with the contemplative traditions of all the world's great religions, in concert with some poets and artists, musicians, and philosophers who speak in this unitive voice in the world this way. And so how to bear witness to this path? There are two aspects to it, really. There are vision aspects and path aspects. The vision aspect is a spiritual worldview of the contemplative traditions, what the world looks like through awakened eyes. And then the path aspect is how to actualize that vision in your own life day by day. So I'd like to start first with something on the vision. So this is going to be very poetic, and but it's had a big effect on me. So this is the philosophical theology of St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Bonaventure and Duns Scotus and Augustine and so on. So this is the poetry of this. From Duns Scotus, that before creation, there was no capacity for love in God, because God is Octus Plurissimus, the overflowing infinity of love. If you have a glass on the table and you're filling with water and the water's overflowing, there's no capacity for water in the cup. So there's no capacity for love in God. So God says, I'm a secret and I desire to be known, so I created you. So God created a capax Dei. God created the capacity to receive the infinity of God, and that's who you are. See? To be a person created by God in the image and likeness of God is to be a living capacity to receive the infinity of God. to live God's life as infinitely as God lives God's infinite life in your eternal nothingness without God. Meister Eckhart puts it this way. He said, for God to be is to give being, and for us to be is to receive being. If we think of God as generosity, we can say that the generosity of the infinite is infinite. God, that ultimately speaking, just one thing is happening. The infinite presence of God is presencing itself, is pouring itself out and giving the infinity of itself away, whole and complete, in and as the intimate immediacy of the gift and the miracle of who we are and are called to be this way. And he says God must do it. So the act of giving God away is you. It's not the act God performs, it's the act that God is. God is the infinite generosity of giving it. And for us to be is to receive being. We are the act of receiving it. And it's not an option. Now, you don't say, I'll pass on that one. This is the sovereignty of who we are in our very ontology by God. And this is the transsubjective communion of ourselves, that by the generosity of God, we're worth all that God is worth. This is a mystery of being a person this way. And then God gives this nature, this person, a nature, because God creates all things through their nature. Let there be light, stones, and trees, and stars, and so on. So God creates a human nature. And human nature, in some sense, is reason. Science and culture and art, it's all of that. But the deepest aspect of human nature is the capacity to experientially realize the person. Is to experientially realize the transsubjective communion this way. And so in the mythic story of the Garden of Eden, their nature was translucent to divinity this way. And then God gave them the gift of freedom to freely say yes to the divinity of themselves, because love is never imposed, it's always offered. So there's like this free yes to accept the infinity of ourselves this way. The mystery of the fall, the whole mythic story of the fall in the garden, is trying to be like God without God. Didn't go well this way. And so our person, who we are as a person, Merton says, it belongs entirely to God. It isn't subject to, it can't be compromised, can't be violated, can't be whatever. But our nature to realize it is wounded this way. And so we're trying then to, how do we restore this, how do we restore this oneness, to say yes to it? And this is our faith. So faith is a kind of a primitive inner assurance, or it's an obscure certainty, or it's an intimate vibrancy, that when we hear God loves us, we know through the power of the Spirit who dwells in our hearts that God does love us this way. And then Merton says this in the last chapter of New Seeds of Contemplation. He says, the world and time are the dance of the Lord in emptiness. The silence of the spheres, that is the sun and the moon and the stars going by overhead. The silence of the spheres is the music of a wedding feast this way. So this is the divinity of, this is the God-given godly nature of the world. The world is God's body, that is bodying forth the love that's uttering it into being this way. All of this is the divinity of ourselves this way. And then he says, we don't have to go very far to catch echoes of that dancing, this interplay of divinity and life and so on. And then he gives some stunning examples of this. And I think this is the key of how we can learn to live a contemplative way of life in the midst of the world, like a point of entry that's available to all of us. He says, sometimes what happens is we're quickened in our heart. He says, sometimes in the world of nature. So you're out walking along, and he said, in the image he uses, he said, you turn to see a flock of birds descending on a grove of junipers to rest and eat. And as if out of the corner of your eye, you catch something in their descent that's primordial, vast, and true. And there is a sense of God's the infinity of their descent. And their descent is the incarnate immediacy of God. And God's the infinity of the gift of your awareness of the divinity of their descent. And the gift of your awareness is the incarnation of God. And so everything is unexplainably holy And for just a split second, it's true. See, when it's actually happening, it's too self-evident to doubt. In some unexplainable way. It's too deep to understand. See, the authenticity, it rings true this way. He says sometimes it happens when we load love in our own heart, when two people intimately in love give themselves to each other in love. They can sense it somehow, something that God's the infinity of their union. In their union, it's the sacrament or the encounter of the infinite love of God. He said, when we're with children in a moment where they're really children, you look into a child's upturned face, you're reading a child a good night story. And you know that when you're in the presence of the child, you're in the presence of God. So you sense it within yourself this way. And so this comes in many ways, the quiet hour at day's end. I think really it's the vibrancy of the creative process. You know, the vision of the artist or the poet or the musician or the philosopher. It's a kind of a flow of an incarnate divinity that flows in the creative act this way, touched by it. And I remember when I left the monastery and I was writing Merton's Palace of Nowhere, I was having a hard time with it. And I wrote a letter to Dan Walsh, who taught medieval philosophy at the monastery. He had a big effect on me, really. And I said, I don't know how to communicate this to people out here, that we subsist in God like light subsists in flame. And he wrote back to me, he said, you can't communicate it, but it will communicate itself through you if you're convinced in what you say and if you are what you say. And you know it will be communicating itself because there will be a response in the listener. They'll know something deep inside of them that matters very much is being addressed. It's like at a communal event that's happening of God's presence. Merton called this spiritual communication. Praise the Lord. And I think that's so true. I think that they're so touched by that thing. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to choose one of these moments. And I want to choose in the midst of nature, but it could be in the arms of the beloved, it could be with the child, it could be in a service to the community, it could be in a creative act, it could be a kind of an inner clarity in the midst of unresolved suffering. It comes as it comes. It comes as it comes. But I want to choose nature, and I want to choose a sunset. And I'd like for us to become a student of these moments this way. And so imagine you're driving home from work at the end of the day, and you're out along a country road somewhere, and the sun is setting, and you don't think much of it at first. I mean, it sets every night. But on this particular night, it's particularly eloquent. And so you pull the car over, you get out, you go down a little embankment, and you sit on the ground. And here's the thing. You give yourself over to the beauty of the setting sun giving itself over to you. That's the moment. That's it. And I'd like to meditate on this moment to see if it rings true. Because it's subtle. It's subtle. First observation. Notice that it's a moment of heightened awareness. It's not lethargic or dull. And here's what's stunning, is that you're not thinking. You might be thinking, maybe thinking about sunsets, but none of your thoughts about sunsets are on the richness of this awareness. And in this moment bears witness that thinking doesn't have the final say in what knowing means. And therefore the thinking you and all that it thinks is transcended this way, not rejected. It's just transcended as being adequate for an understanding of the truth of yourself and our life in the world. It's self-evident in an unexplainable way in your heart this way. Just thinking you and all that it thinks is transcended. Next, also notice it's not an act of memory. It isn't as if you know it's called a sunset because when you were a child, your parents told you that, so you know it's called a sunset. This way. So it's not an act of memory. Why? Because it's virginal. From all the eons of the universe to the earth up till now, the sun has never, never, never set before tonight, ever. First time. And for all the eons to come, it'll never set again. It's a once and for all time event. See? And memory. And so the remembering you and all that it remembers is transcended. And having the final say in who you are this way. Not rejected, but not adequate this way. Because of the virginal newness of the awakening that's born in this quickening that's given to your heart this way. Also notice about memory that you're not in time. This is why if you linger there and it has duration, you have to look at your wristwatch to see how much time passed, because it's the eternality of reality. It's the eternality of the presence that never passes away, that's endlessly ribboned through all this endlessly passing away. Like right now, all of us are sitting here passing away. So, breath by breath, we're living our one less breath to be life until death. In the monastery, they had these little they took them away, but they had these little pious sayings. You're supposed to practice custody of the eyes. So if you looked up, you'd get zapped by one of these sayings. One of them, these are so great. Today, glistening eyes, tomorrow, empty sockets. Praise, oh, geez. So good. But it's true. See, the thing is, it's so funny, but it isn't. See, but here's the point. Is it true that our body dies? We don't, because we're eternal. See? Nobody dies. When you were conceived and born, that's not when you began. It's where you appeared in time. Okay? But it wasn't your beginning, because you emerged out of the eternal depths of God, who contemplated you in Christ before the origins of the universe. And since everything in God is God, this is the divinity of you that was never born. And the you that was never born will never die. And so God exhaled you out of the eternality of God onto the earth. And we're here right now. Inhaling, 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 inhaling. And so your first act on this earth is that you're born, you take in a deep, you inhale. And your last act on this earth, you'll exhale and you will not inhale. See? And when you exhale, it's because God inhales, the circle completes itself. See? And it's eternity this way. But can we see that even now it's true? It's veiled, but it's true. Breath by breath. To be at the deathbed of a dying loved one is to know that your next breath depends on God. It doesn't lie in your power to give yourself your next breath, lest you be presumptuous. Lest you be presumptuous. Breath by breath by breath, we're living this fleeting life, this passing away that never passes away this way. And so you're beyond time.